Nama Om Vishnu Vadaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadeshatare Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchkap Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha, Paritanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So, this evening, devotees, we're going on to the fourth section of the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Fourth section is from verse 13 to verse 19, and the subject matter is Krishna answers question 6. Question 6 has not really been touched on so far. I mean, in terms of any type of explanation or description. Yes, so question 6 was, or subject 6, question 6, what is the object of knowledge? In Sanskrit, gyayam. Gyayam. What is the object of knowledge? And last night, of course, we went in some detail into knowledge and the process by which you can get knowledge, all those different qualities which help one to get knowledge, without which you can't get knowledge. So this is now regarding the 6th topic, gyayam, the object of knowledge, that which is to be known. So, yes, it's it's the soul and the super soul, just to keep things simple, but particularly the Lord, at least in this section here, he discusses the soul, we'll see in a minute or two, but particularly focuses on the super soul. The super soul. What is the super soul? And well, basically, anyway, we'll see, we'll go through the verses now. But basically, the super soul is the super entity above and beyond us, and completely unaffected by material conditions, maintains all living entities, and has many super qualities, just, amazing qualities. Okay, so the whole section is verse 13 to verse 19, but verse 19 is sort of separated out. It's kind of summarizing things. So the first section or subsection is from verse 13 to verse 18. And just so you know, as we're reading, we'll read through these verses 13 to 18, just the verses, as usual right now, but the first verse, 13, is describing the jiva, the spirit soul. And the rest from 14 to 18, those verses are describing the super soul. An interesting point, as you'll notice, is that Krishna does not very clearly distinguish one from the other. The soul of verse 13 from the super soul of verse 14 and then on to 18. It's not that Krishna says that in 13, now I'm going to describe the individual soul, and then when he comes to 14, it's not that he says, okay, I've described the individual soul, now I'll describe the super soul. In a certain sense, it seems just like a continuum from the soul, Brahman, the spirit soul, and then onto the super soul. I mean, when you tune in and understand what's being said in the descriptions of the soul and the super soul, then it's easy to see these are two different things. But like I said, it's not that Krishna really distinguishes, here is one, now here is the other. You have to just recognize on the basis of the different qualities and different features, characteristics of the two types as they're mentioned. All right, so let us now read verses 13 to 18, just the translations as we do. And like we said, this verse 13, when we come back to it in a couple of minutes or whatever, then we'll make it clear and you'll see how it is talking about the individual soul and not the super soul. But for the time being, just listen to this. I shall now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal. Brahman, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. So, Brahman, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to Krishna, is beyond the cause and effect of this world. This is the spirit soul. This is us. Anyway, I just made a point of mentioning that. So now verse 14. Everywhere are his hands and legs, his eyes, heads and faces, and his ears everywhere. In this way, the super soul exists, pervading everything. And, you know, in the actual Sanskrit, it's not specifically proper, or Krishna doesn't specifically say the super soul, but in terms of the characteristics which are being listed out in the verse, it's pretty clear to see this is the super soul. And 15. The super soul is the original source of all senses, yet he is without senses. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings. He transcends the modes of nature, and at the same time, he is the master of all the modes of material nature. This is the super soul, of course, not the individual soul. We are not the masters I am far from being the master or a master of all the modes of material nature. Forget that. All right, 16. The supreme truth exists outside and inside of all living beings, the moving and the non-moving. Because he is subtle, he is beyond the power of the material senses to see or to know. Although far, far away, he is also near to all. Well, there's a little bit of that is practically, you could say, from the Ishopanishad. 17. Although the supersoul appears to be divided among all beings, he is never divided. He is situated as one. Although he is the maintainer of every living entity, it is to be understood that he devours and develops all. Oh, that's the supersoul. And 18. He is the source of light in all luminous objects. He is beyond the darkness of matter and is unmanifested. He is knowledge. He is the object of knowledge, and he is the goal of knowledge. He is situated in everyone's heart. Okay, so back to 13, let's just analyze a little bit what's being said here. 13. I shall now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal. Brahman, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. So, So this is the individual soul. This is the individual soul being described here. Gyayam, the knowable, the object of knowledge, that which can be known. Let's just have a look at the purport. So Prabhupada explains here, it's right at the beginning of the purport. The Lord has explained the field of activities and the knower of the field. Yes, well, that we saw right in the beginning of the chapter. The field is the body. And of course, in verses 6 and 7, and verse 5 to some degree, the nature of the body as the field of activities, all the different components and like that, they were all described in detail. So he's also explained the process of knowing the knower of the field of activities. Now he begins to explain the knowable, that which can be known. And Prabhupada says, first the soul, and then the super soul. By knowledge of the knower, both the soul and the super soul, one can relish the nectar of life. Isn't that nice? We want to relish the nectar. We want some nectar. Krishna, please. Right. So now how exactly do we figure it out that this is not about the super soul but the individual soul? If we look at the Sanskrit, let us just look at the Sanskrit, and there you'll see. In the third line Anadi Matparam Brahma. Matparam. You can see in the word for word and in the translation of the actual verse, Matparam means subordinate to me, or that Krishna is higher. Matparam. I am higher than that Brahman. So that's the living entity. Matparam. Me, I'm superior to that Brahman, to that spirit, that particular spirit, which is beginningless but subordinate to me. So that's a very important point to note. Otherwise, one can easily get stuck or just plain confused. So, an interesting little point that Prabhupada makes at the end of the purport is that it's the second to last couple of sentences. Therefore, the description of Brahman mentioned in this verse is in relation to the individual soul. And when the word Brahman is applied to the living entity, it is to be understood that he is Vijnana Brahma, as opposed to Ananda Brahma. Ananda Brahma is the Supreme Brahman, personality of Godhead. This is going back to verse 5, to the purport there. If you remember, there were the 5 Brahmas, or the 5 truths, 5 types of realizations of the absolute truth. Anamaya. Anamaya was the first, in which the truth is understood in terms of food. Anna meaning food. Then there's pranamaya. After realizing the absolute truth in food, one can realize him as the living symptoms, pranamaya, like the life airs or the symptoms of life. Doesn't mean the soul, but the symptoms of life as they appear within the material body, the gross body and subtle body. Yeah. And then third is Jnanamaya, which is realization basically of the subtle body, thinking, feeling, and willing, beyond just the food level, which is the gross body, and the living symptoms, but the sort of, the subtle body, the psychological aspect of our being. And then the fourth was Vijnanamaya, which means the soul, actual soul. And so the characteristics, the life of the soul is distinguished from just the basic life symptoms as they appear in the gross body like that. And then finally there's Anandamaya, the blissful nature, that's the Supreme Lord. So Prabhupada makes that point there towards the end of the purport. And another just interesting little point, we noted that when we were reading verse 3 and describing it a little, we just very briefly made the point that in this chapter there are a number of verses which establish the difference between the soul and Krishna. That was verse 3. And, well, yes, that was also, verse 3 was, Krishna says, I am also the knower. Cha. Cha means and. The soul is the knower, and me. And me. So like this, this verse, this chapter it's more subtle than many chapters, but it's to help us understand the difference, among other things, the difference between the soul and the super soul. Right, so these things are there in verse 13. Okay, so now we go on from 14 to 18, is describing the super soul, really very different to the soul who is mat para Brahma, mat param. That Brahman, that spiritual thing which is matpara, subordinate to me, which I am superior to. So, okay, 14. Everywhere has hands and legs, his eyes, heads, and faces, and he has ears everywhere. In this way, the super soul exists, pervading everything. So this is obviously the super soul, and it's obviously not us. It's obviously not us. The super soul, as we go through these verses, we already read the verses, but there's so many examples of the functioning, the capabilities of the super soul, which in these verses that distinguish the super soul from the living entity. And here, of course, this is typical. His hands and legs are everywhere. Ours are not. His eyes, heads, and faces, he has multiple faces. Sometimes if someone is duplicitous, diplomatic, they'll say one thing to one person and a different thing to another person. Sometimes they're called two-faced. Two-faced. I mean, it's a type of dishonesty. Two-faced. But three-faced, I don't know, that's pushing it. But the Lord has faces, actual faces, not just in terms of trying to be tricky, but actual faces everywhere. Ultimately, he's within the atom. He's within the heart of every living entity, but ultimately he's within the atom. In personal forms, with faces. So how many faces does he have? And arms and legs, etc., and ears. So this is the nature. This is the nature of the super soul, or part of the nature. The other verses are going further. So as Prabhupada explains here in the purport, that it's like he's one in many. He's one in many. The same point is made a couple of verses on. But basically the nature of the super soul is he is one, but in many forms. Many, like we said, within every atom. How many atoms are there? Yeah, so you get the idea. One in many. Really many. and from Lord Brahma down to the ant, down to the microbe, down to the atom. Yeah. The individual soul, Prabhupada's explaining in the purport, the individual soul cannot say that I'm like this. So the Lord shows his omnipotency in different ways, as Prabhupada mentions here. Just a sec. Yeah. As Prabhupada mentions here, that, what does he say? 14. He shows his omnipotency by being able to extend his hand. It's kind of the middle of the purport, fractionally after. The Supreme is different from the individual soul. The Supreme Lord can extend his hand without limit. The individual soul cannot. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that if anyone offers him a flower or a fruit or a little water, he accepts it. If the Lord is a far distance away, how can he accept things? This is the omnipotence, means all powerfulness of the Lord. Even though he is situated in his abode far away, he can extend his hand to accept what's offered to the deities here, or whatever the devotee offers anywhere. And Krishna actually takes it. That is omnipotence. And Srila Prabhupada makes an interesting point just immediately after what we read now about his omnipotence. So that is his potency. In the Brahma Samhita 537 it's stated, Goloka eva nivasat yakilatma bhuta. Although he's always engaged in pastimes in his transcendental planet, he is all-pervading. The individual soul cannot claim that he's all-pervading. Therefore, this verse describes the Supreme Soul, the personality of Godhead, not the individual soul. Okay. And then a slightly different perspective. Shri Shri Radharanath, Shri Giri Govardhan, Shri Caitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. So again, the super soul in verse 15, but a little different perspective. The super soul is the original source of all senses, yet he is without senses. Whoa. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings. He transcends the modes of nature, and at the same time, he is the master of all the modes of material nature. So, in the purport, in the beginning of the purport, Srila Prabhupada makes the point, discusses about this statement about how he's the source of all senses. But he is without senses. This verse is a little different. These are different qualities. But this verse is a little different from verse 13 in that this verse is giving different contrasts. He is the source of all senses, but he is without senses. A contrast. He is unattached, although he's maintainer of all living beings. He transcends the modes, but he is the master of the modes. So these are all contrasts. It's a different sort of style of presentation, you could say, to the previous verse 14. So, Prabhupada explains in the beginning of the purport, although he's the source of all the senses, he doesn't have material senses. He doesn't have material senses. For example, we have eyes, we can see, but our seeing is limited. We cannot see spirit. We cannot see the soul. We cannot see the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We mentioned the other day how Prahlad, when Hiranyakashipu asked him, "Is your God in the pillar?" Srila Prabhupada describes that Prahlad looked at the pillar, saw the Lord in the pillar, and said, yes, in a straightforward way. Yes, he's in the pillar. So of course Prahlad's a devotee, but he has transcendental senses. And the Supreme Personality of Godhead has transcendental senses. He can see the spirit soul. He can see spiritual bodies and so on like that, which we cannot. Yes. So his senses are not limited like our senses, only able to see so far. He can see from here to Goloka Vrindavan, no problem. So this is the point in that regard. Yeah, so his senses, his hands, are not materially contaminated, but still he has hands. Prabhupada's explaining in the purport, still he has hands, therefore he's able to accept offerings. If he didn't have hands, how could he accept offerings? But they're not material hands, they're spiritual hands. Yeah. And where is it now? Let's just see. Yeah. Prabhupada actually, it's in the middle of this first paragraph. Prabhupada quotes a line or so from Shvedashvatara Upanishad, Apani Pado Javano Grahita. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has no hands which are materially contaminated, but he has his hands and accepts whatever sacrifice is offered to him. That is the distinction between the conditioned soul and the super soul. He has no material eyes, but he has eyes. And Prabhupada, to distinguish our eyes from the Lord's eyes, Prabhupada makes the point that he sees everything, past, present, and future. Yeah, he lives within our hearts. He knows what we've done, what we're doing, what we're going to do, and all these things. So like this, this distinction is made. So in the second paragraph, the point is made at the beginning of the second paragraph that Bhagavad Gita also confirms that when the Lord appears, he appears as he is, by his internal potency, not by the material potency, by his own spiritual internal potency. And Srila Prabhupada explains he has his eternal form called Satchitananda Vigraha, Brahma Samhita verse 1. He's full of all opulence. He's the proprietor of all wealth and the knower of all, and the owner of all energy. He is the most intelligent and is full of knowledge. These are some of the symptoms of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the maintainer of all living entities and the witness of all activity. So, anyway, Prabhupada goes on to make the point, which we've mentioned actually. Due to materially contaminated senses, we cannot see the Lord. But when our senses become purified and spiritualized, like his senses are spiritual, then we'll be able to see him everywhere. And verse 16, the Supreme Truth exists outside and inside of all living beings, the moving and the non-moving. Because he's subtle, he is beyond the power of the material senses to see or to know. Although far, far away, he is also near to all. Oh, okay. Right. So, he's present. Prabhupada makes the point in the beginning of the purport that the Supreme Lord is outside and inside every living being, but he is present in both the spiritual and material worlds. Although he's far, far away, he's still near to us. And he's very hard to understand. Oops. What have I done? He's very hard to understand. Oops. 16. Very hard to understand. But, as Prabhupada says, it's about 2/3 of the way down the purport. In the Vedic language, it's said that to understand him, our material mind and senses cannot act. But one who's purified his mind and senses by practicing Krishna consciousness in devotional service can see him constantly. And this is, again, it's Brahma Samhita. Vedeshu durlabham, adurlabham, atma bhakto. Just by studying the Vedas, I mean, not doesn't mean the Krishna conscious parts of the Vedic literatures, just means the general Vedic literatures. Vedeshu durlabham. It's very difficult to understand him, but adurlabham, durlabham means difficult, durlabham means not difficult, easy, atma bhakto, by devotion of the soul. And Srila Prabhupada refers again, actually, to Brahma Samhita. Just immediately after this, it's confirmed in Brahma Samhita that the devotee who's developed love for the Supreme God can see him always without cessation. Premanjana churita bhakti velochanena santasadaiva hridayeshu velokayanti. Famous verse, we've already mentioned it before in the seminar. Premanjana, Anjana means ointment. Prema Anjana. If you anoint, if you treat your eyes with the ointment of love, then your eyes, which at this point are like materially diseased, they'll become cured. And then Santa, the saintly people who are like this, Santa Sadaiva, always, Hridayeshu Vilokayanti, they always see the Lord within their hearts. And indeed, in many cases, just all around them, as we mentioned in the case of Prahlad. You know, there's a nice story we tell on Parikrama. Parikrama, wow. When will we go on Parikrama again? Oh, Krishna. When we go to a place in Braj, it's called Badrinath. It's not the one in the Himalayas, it's the one in the greater Vrajmandal area. And there is a lake called Deva Sarovar. And the story behind that lake is that there was one devotee. He had a very unusual name by Russian language standards. Ribu Muni. Ribu Muni was his name. And he would just sit there by the lake, Deva Sarovar, and go into meditation and see Radha and Krishna in his meditation within him. One day he went into his meditation, but Radha and Krishna didn't come. What happened to Radha and Krishna? And he thought, maybe I committed an offense, or I'm doing something wrong or something. So he tried, but Radha and Krishna were not coming. All this time his eyes are closed because he's doing some internal meditation. Then he opened his eyes and Radha and Krishna were standing right in the front of him. So that happened at Deva Sarovar. Yeah, so Premanjana Charita Bhakti Vilochanena Santa Sadaiva Hridayeshu Vilokayanti. And as Prabhupada mentions, this is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita chapter 11 verse 54, where the Sanskrit is Bhaktya Twananyaya Sakya. Only by devotional service can he be seen and understood as he is. Okay, and so now we go on to verse 17. 17. Although the Supersoul appears to be divided among all beings, he is never divided. He is situated as one. We mentioned that some minutes ago. Although he's the maintainer of every living entity, it is to be understood that he devours and develops all. Oh, Hare Krishna. Yes, so he's one in many, or many in one. Depends how you want to think about. Yeah. The same person is manifesting in many forms. Four-armed Supersoul forms, Vishnu forms, within the heart of every living entity, within every atom, as we mentioned. And in some bodies, like if you read in the first canto of the Bhagavatam, I think it's probably chapter 8, 9, it's 8, 9, around there, is the story of how Maharaj Parikshit is saved from the Brahmastra of Ashvatthama. And the Brahmastra weapon was coming, and little Parikshit in the womb of his mother suddenly saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead in a four-armed form appearing within the womb to protect him. And that form was something like this, sort of several inches tall, something like that. But in the ant, the Lord is within the heart of the ant. The ant has a heart of some sort also. The Lord is not that size. He fits according to the size of the body. And what to speak of him being in every atom. So, the example is given of a room full of mirrors. If we mentioned this the other day, actually. If you go to some circuses or public festivals of different sorts, sometimes they have a room full of mirrors. And you pay some money, you go into the room, and there are all these different mirrors. One makes you thin, one makes you fat, one makes you tall, one makes you short, one makes you look like distorted terribly, and these are just different mirrors. But all those images in the mirrors, they are you, or reflections of your body. But now you're looking so different in different ways because of the way the mirrors are made. So similarly, the Lord is in different bodies as the Supersoul. In some cases, like human, he's approximately several inches, something of that sort. But in the ant's body, he must be much, much smaller. And what to speak of within the atom? Yes. But it is one person. And again, going back to the room of mirrors, the hall of mirrors, when you leave the room, which is full of mirrors, then all those images, the tall one, the short one, the big, the wide one, all of them, they all go also. Because there's one person, you. There's not actually many people with many different features. So the super soul is one in many. Right. And Srila Prabhupada in the purport gives an example, the example of the sun. The example is given of the sun. The sun at the meridian, midday, is situated in its place. But if one goes for 5,000 miles in all directions and asks, where is the sun? Everyone will say that it is shining on his head. Yeah. Prabhupada actually, it's, as I recall, it's in Lilamrita. Prabhupada tells the story of, I think, one of his nephews, maybe it was one of his sons, but anyway, some child relative. And Prabhupada said this boy, one day they were walking together, they walked a little distance, and Prabhupada said the boy made a very intelligent remark. The boy said that the sun is following us. The sun is following us. Now you walk past a building. The building does not follow you. The building stays and you move on. But you're walking, the sun is there, and when you've gone another 100 meters or whatever, even a kilometer, the sun is still there. Yes. So, nice example. And he's the maintainer of all living beings. So obviously he's not us. But along with being the maintainer, Prabhupada mentions it's about 2/3 of the way down the purport, that along with being the maintainer, in the form of time, he devours also. He is the annihilator, the killer of all. The killer of all. Talk about a mass murderer. The Lord is disposing of the bodies of everyone. So yes, things are going on like that. And 18, that of course, the devouring, we saw in the 11th chapter, universal form, obviously. 18, he's the source of light in all luminous objects. He's beyond the darkness of matter and is unmanifested. He is knowledge. He is the object of knowledge, and he is the goal of knowledge. He is situated in everyone's heart. So in the purport in the beginning, Prabhupada notes this, that the Lord, the Supersoul, is the source of light like in the sun, in the moon, in the stars. In the spiritual world, they don't have a sun or a moon to illuminate, because they don't need that, because Krishna's there. And his Brahma Jyoti effulgence is there to illuminate everything. So they don't need the usual electricity, light bulbs, and all that, wiring systems that we need. Yes. And just an interesting little point. Srila Prabhupada, you have to kind of search for it if you want to read it. But if you do a really careful search, you'll see. Prabhupada explains why the sky is blue. When there are no clouds, it's a nice day, then what is there? There's blue sky. And Prabhupada makes the point that because Krishna's body is blue, his effulgence, the Brahma Jyoti, is blue. His body is not like white light or clear light, whatever you'd say here, from these light bulbs. No, his body is blue, so his effulgence is blue. And this material world is situated in the Brahma Jyoti, but Brahma Jyoti covered by matter. But still, we can see the sky is blue. It's the color of the Brahma Jyoti, which is reflecting or manifesting the color of Krishna, but there's a covering of matter. Yes, okay. So, second paragraph. We're in verse 18, aren't we? Yeah. Second paragraph. Prabhupada says, the Vedic literature confirms that Brahman is concentrated transcendental knowledge. Transcendental knowledge is for understanding him, so he is the object of knowledge. Okay. Okay, so, and he's in everyone's heart as the supreme controller. So in these ways we understand very clearly the super soul and the individual soul are very different. Here's a special question for those of you doing Bhakti Shastri, based on this verse, chapter 13, verse 18, but referring to a different verse, Bhagavatam 4:12-19 purport. Dhruva Maharaj, being liberated from the material concept of life, was situated in transcendental knowledge and could perceive the presence of a transcendental airplane which was as brilliant as the full moonlight. Such knowledge is a special favor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One can, however, rise to this platform of knowledge by the gradual process of advancing in devotional service or Krishna consciousness. So the question that you'll have to answer is that, citing this verse about knowledge, who was the person referred to here who was situated in transcendental knowledge? And it was Dhruva Maharaj. And let us just close by reading 19, which is a summary of what we've just read now, basically, and even going back to into the earlier verses, the beginning of the chapter. Thus the field of activities, the body, knowledge, and the knowable have been summarily described by me. Only my devotees can understand this thoroughly and thus attain to my nature. So it's brief, it's a summary, it's not detailed. So Prabhupada, in the second paragraph, does give a summary. Let's just try to quickly read it. Now, to summarize, one may understand that verses 6 and 7, beginning from Mahabhutani and continuing through Caitanya, Driti, analyze the material elements and certain manifestations of the symptoms of life. These combine to form the body or the field of activities. And verses 8 through 12 from Amanitvam through Tattva Gyan Artha Darshanam describe the process of knowledge for understanding both types of knower of the field of activities, namely the soul and the supersoul. Then verses 13 through 18, beginning from Anadi Mat Param and continuing through Hridi Sarvasya Vishtitam, describe the soul and the Supreme Lord or the Supersoul. So therefore, three things have been described: the field of activity, the body, the process of understanding, and the soul and Supersoul. Hare Krishna. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath, Shri Giri Govardhan, Shri Caitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. Let me just say one last thing. We saw that in this verse 19, Krishna says, only my devotees can understand this thoroughly and thus attain to my nature. So Prabhupada at the end here of this purport says, so for these devotees, well, let's just read the paragraph. Thus, three items have been described: the field of activity, the body, the process of understanding, we read last night, those different qualities, and both the soul and supersoul. It's especially described here that only the unalloyed devotees of the Lord can understand these three items clearly. Soul, supersoul. They don't get mixed up and think the soul and supersoul are one. From these verses here, they understand soul and supersoul are quite distinct from each other. So for these devotees, Bhagavad Gita is fully useful. It is they who can attain the supreme goal, the nature of the Supreme Lord Krishna. In other words, only devotees and not others can understand Bhagavad Gita and derive the desired result. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.